particularly to Chris Hare at the end. I met him only a few weeks ago, and we got talking about with a group called Friends in Homefield Park. I got talking about history around this area. Now I know that this group you have been studying through the decades, last term. Hands up, any of you who found out anything interesting, particularly about education, in the past decades? Some of you must know things that you thought was completely different. Go on. Oh, it was a long time ago, but anything. I came into a lesson and Mrs. Button had out her school reports. And you, that class, were buzzing reading those reports. What did you find out? They used to whip kids. Well, we'll find out how they whipped kids. So they used to, a long time ago, whip kids. Anything else you found out about education was different? Yes, Luke?
Chalkboard rubbers at people.
They used to throw chalkboard rubbers at people. When I was young, I remember the chalkboard and rubber being thrown at people. Yes? So before the SATs, which you're sitting, so this group of children are sitting their key exams this week. So you did your maths paper this morning. And before that, a long time ago, they did the 11 plus. Okay, so a different test. Yes?
They had like desks.
Sorry? They had like desks. Amazing things, these desks. So they had different desks. Right, hands down, so I'm sure you'll hear lots. Okay, so I talked to Chris, and he said he'd love to come in and bring some of his friends. I'm sure Chris will introduce them, and talk to you about education in Worthing. So that's what they're going to do today. Chris will introduce some of the topic that we're talking about and some of the work they've been doing about the history of Worthing. At the end, I'm sure you'll have lots of questions, and Mrs. Putnam will be asking you then what questions you have, and if Mrs. Putnam then can repeat them so we can all hear the question. So save your questions until the end. Okay? So, over to Chris to start us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Right, good afternoon, everyone. Hello. Good afternoon. Yes, I'm Chris, and I have been running a project in this part of Worthing called the Worthing Village Heritage Project, because a long time ago, before anyone here was born, 200 years ago, there was a small little village, Worthing, which is a big, big town now. It's very, very small, and that village was close by where we are now. So if you know Waitrose, or perhaps you know that you've seen the Swan Pub, or you know the Sydney Walter Centre, that's where the little village was. And we tried to find out all the history that happened long ago, but we were also trying to take the story right through to now. So we were interested in talking to anybody who'd lived here and been to school here about what they remembered. And that's how it came about that these three people who I'm going to introduce you to in a minute got involved in the project, and they helped us make a film, a documentary film, all about the history of this old village area. Now, to my left here is Tom Y. Now, Tom has been an important man in Worthing because some years ago he was Mayor of Worthing. Does anyone know what a mayor is? Yes? What?
Is he a person who runs the town?
Well, he's a bit like the king. He's like the king of Worthing. He's got big, you're quite right in what you're saying, but the mayor has big robes and a special hat, and he sits in front of the council meeting, and the councillors are the people who run Worthing. So Tom did that a few years ago. In the middle, we've got Robin Baker, and now Robin, like Tom, grew up in Station Road, that's very close to here. So all his early days were spent here, and like Tom, went to school. Now it wasn't this school, because this school wasn't built, but it was Sussex Road School, and that school closed, but the building's still there, and the building today is the Sydney Walter Centre. And finally, at the end, Brenda Forrester, and she was born in North Street which is where Liddell's is. It looked very different when Brenda was born, a very, very different street. And she too went to Sussex Road School. And all three of them were born in the Second World War. Are you familiar with the Second World War? Does anyone know what it was? Yes, well, it was, yes.
It was a war involving the Germans against the Germans and some other countries against Britain and France and America.
That's exactly right. That's exactly what it was. And it was a very, very big war, and it lasted for 6 years. So it lasted for more than half the time that most of you have been alive. It was a long, long time, and life was very different, as you can imagine, in wartime. And this is when 3 people here grew up, and they went to school after the war was over. But although the war was over, things were still difficult and still very hard. So there wasn't all the food there is today, and there wasn't all the luxury and comforts. It was a very, very different country to live in, and a very different town to live in, and a very different way of going to school. So that's what they're going to talk to you about now, and we're going to start off with Brenda.
Well, do you mind if I stay seated? I think I'm nearer you then, aren't I? Good afternoon. Yes, I was born in the war, but I didn't go to school until the end of 1945, after the war had finished. But as Chris said, there were a lot of things we didn't have because all the factories in England had been used to make things for the war. So they couldn't make anything that wasn't necessary for the war. So we had no new toys. Now, what are, come on. You expect lovely toys every Christmas and birthday. There were no new toys being made, so we couldn't have toys. So my brother, who is 7 years older than me, I had his 7-year-old teddy bear and a doll that my mother made me out of fabric, which is now no longer politically correct, which is a gollywog, which was a black doll. And I'm very sad that it's not an acceptable term because I absolutely loved my gollywog. I didn't have a new doll until I was 8 years old. We also had rationing for clothes, so we had no school uniform because we just had to wear whatever our mothers could make or pass down to us. I wore my brother's school raincoat, which was 7 years old, when I got it, all the way through this junior school time. And how many of you have got white trainers and or fancy trainers with flashing lights and pink trainers and all that? Everyone, I expect. Have you all got trainers? Well, in our day they were called plimsolls, and we never had white plimsolls. We had black plimsolls for Woolworths, and which was a big shop then, and we only had white plimsolls when we were teenagers and went to senior school if we played tennis. No one in my childhood had white plimsolls. So there's an example of how what we wore, our clothes were made for us, and perhaps made out of one of Mum's old dresses. And also, they also made things like, I'm sure some of you have got blankets or rugs that you spread on the ground if you go on a picnic or on the beach with big squares on. Well, our mums made overcoats out of those, so that's the sort of thing which was very different, because these days you can go into supermarkets even and find lovely clothes for children at a quite reasonable price. And we didn't have anything like that, but we had a lot of fun. We played a lot of games, some of which you might still play today in your playground. I'm sure the girls still do skipping, don't they? With a big rope, with several of you going in the rope together. Well, I expect you recite rhymes when you do that, do you? That, yes. Well, those rhymes, some of those are hundreds of years old. Did you know that? Some of those girls have been skipping to the same rhymes for hundreds of years. Another game that you might play, I meant to go on the beach and pick up 5 small stones. Do you play 5 stones or jacks? Where you toss 5 stones up and try to catch them on the back of your hand. You bounce a ball while you do it. Well, when I started playing out of school, we had to use stones. But then they started to sell little cross metal things that were called jacks. Now the interesting thing is, and as a much older lady, I've been lucky enough to go on holiday to places where the ancient Romans lived. And their children played exactly the same game. So that one game, oh, thank you, Robin, he's got a set. Wonderful. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. But there you are, there's a jack. And you threw them up in the air and tried to catch them on the back of your hand. And we got very good at it, didn't we? But that is a game that children have played for thousands of years. And children still play, I'm sure, various places in the world. Thanks for what else? Well, I was talking about the clothes because we had no school uniforms. Everything was rationed, and the lady that you now know as a very elderly queen, she got married in 1947 to Prince Philip, and we still had clothes rationing. But everybody in England wanted the Queen to have well, she was Princess Elizabeth then, wanted
Brenda,
her...
sorry, do you want to explain what rationing is?
Oh, rationing.
Right,
Sorry.
no.
Rationing is when you're only allowed so much each. For example, food rationing, everyone was only allowed 1 egg a week each. And so lots of people, I know my parents did, kept chickens in their back garden so that they could have more eggs. But the rationing applied by the government was 1 egg a week. Which isn't much, is it? But there were all sorts of things like that. And they had food rationing and clothing rationing. So you had coupons, and you took it to a shop that sold clothes, and you handed in so many coupons, so your mother could buy you a new pair of shoes for school. She had to have so many coupons, so you saved them up, that sort of thing. And so the Queen, as Princess Elizabeth, was going to be a bride, but everybody wanted her to look like a proper princess should do on her wedding day, like Kate did. And so people from all over the country sent clothing coupons to Buckingham Palace so that the princess could have a wedding dress, but it was still used from clothing coupons. Now, there you are. The historian along there didn't know that. How interesting. So that's an example of how things were limited in what you could get hold of. One of the other things that was rationed was sweets. And I remember my dad taking my brother, sister and I to the sweet shop on a Saturday morning with the ration books. And we could each choose a quarter of a pound, and I don't know what that is in, but what's it in? I don't know. Anyway, a very small quantity of sweets. We could each choose which sort of sweet we wanted with our sweet rationing coupons.
How many would you get in the bag then?
But
So
it's
say
quite
you-
small.
say you had-
I mean, smaller than my fist.
Yeah, but I mean, how many would you get in them to get like sort of like?
Well, that would depend whether
Three.
it's licorice, all sorts, or toffees, or whatever, how much
Yeah. So
space.
how many toffees would you get in the thing about?
So I would have thought only about 10 toffees. So
In the most.
at the most, yeah. So I would think that's how many sweets you were allowed for the week. Per week. So, but we did everything else very happily, had wonderful childhood in school at Sussex Road School, and I think that's what I was going to cover.
Robin.
Hi. What I'll try and do first is to give you some idea what life was like growing up in the 1940s to the mid-1950s. As my granddaughter, age 4, says, the black and white days. Because all the photographs that you see of me and my family is black and white. I was born in 1943 in Station Road, which is about a kilometre from here to Holmesville School. The house I lived in was built in 1877. We had no electric, we had gas lighting, no hot water, no bathroom, no TV, no radio, apart from a speaker which came from the BBC. There was a light programme, which was mostly music, and a home service which was played and so on. I was taken to school at the age of 4, a very nervous little boy, by my mother. She walked me to school at Homefield Primary School, which again is about a kilometre from my house. As Chris said, it's now the City Water Centre. We were introduced to the various classrooms by a teacher. I don't remember the name because that was odd 60 odd years ago. We were told where the outside toilets were. There were no indoor toilets. The girls' toilet was at one end of the playground and the boys' toilet was at the other. We were also introduced to where the cloakrooms were and the various classrooms. So the very next day, we made friends before that, and then we went to, left about 8:30 in the morning, and we walked to school and played various games in the playground. Mainly hopscotch, and the girls, as previously mentioned, on a swing or a rope. At 9 o'clock, a bell would ring, and we were summoned to line up in our appropriate classrooms, and then we had to go into the classroom in complete silence, sit down and wait for the teacher. As soon as the teacher entered the room, we all stood up and said, "Good morning, Miss," or whoever, Mr., whoever the teacher was at the time. After which we were told to sit down, and we were inspected to make sure we had, I've got some illustrations here, a clean hanky, which you had to have in your pocket. You would hold it up where the teacher would just look at it to make sure it's nice and clean. Also, we inspected were your hands and your fingernails. If by any chance you didn't have a handkerchief or your hands were dirty, you were sent either outside the classroom to stand outside for about half an hour or in the corner of the classroom as a punishment. Secondly, we were told to chant their tables. I'm not sure whether you do that now. It goes 1 to 2 is 2, 2 2 is 4 and such like until we get to 12 12s. That we did every morning. After that, we were given a pen, similar to this one, some ink, which was at the end of just to illustrate, which was at the end of a desk, and also an exercise book, similar to this one, and a piece of blotting paper. I've tried to illustrate what it was like to try and write with a pen, which was very, very difficult. You more or less scratch your name, and when you've done that, you put the pen down, and after every page, you had to blot it. If you didn't, that's what would happen. So you made sure that you had a piece of blotting paper, a reasonable size pen with a nice nib on the end, and a reasonable supply of ink. When your ink ran out, you had what we call ink monitors. 2 children used to volunteer, go to the caretaker, and pick up a similar flagon to that, full of ink, where they would go around every morning and top up your ink well on your various desks. And so 11 o'clock in the morning, a bell would ring, which meant it was milk time. So milk monitors would come around, again, 2 children that volunteered for that, with a crate of milk in a small container, such as that, with a straw in the top. And you were given 15 minutes to drink your milk. You even had your milk when it was summertime, and the school was broken up for 6 weeks. You still came back to your school, walked back to your school at 11 o'clock in the morning, where a helper or a neighbour of the school would give you your milk, and such as in there. Let me see. Oh yes, very sad occasion. One day in 1947, I believe, the King died in 52.
6th of February.
That's it, 6th of February 52. A policewoman came into the school and notified that King George VI had died. As Tommy mentioned earlier, that most of the children started to cry, especially the girls. It was a very sad occasion. Punishments. Punishment at school was quite severe. I won't mention the cane, that was more or less as a pointer, but I think you've been told about that already. rather than asking from that. Mostly it was to be given lines. If you, for instance, if you talked in the classroom without being spoken to by the teacher, you'd have to write down 100 lines. I must not talk in the class, I must, and so forth. And the teacher would mark accordingly. If it wasn't satisfactory, you did it again. We did have various trades in the school. We did have a stage and a classroom which had that stage where we had nativity plays, such as you do now, and they were quite fun. As I mentioned before, the time of, we had Easter off was a week. We had 6 weeks for summertime, and no other days were allowed. That's all we had. At 3:30, 3 o'clock, a bell would ring, whereupon we'd all line up and make our way home. And that was our end of our day. And that was about all I can remember of it. It had been 60 years ago. So I hope that's very interesting for you.
Thank you, Rob. Tom.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to try to pick up on the little bits that my colleagues here have missed out on. Can I just have your milk, Robin? I don't know how many of you here like fresh milk. Can you put your hands up?
Oh, right.
Put your hands up those who really don't like it. Really don't like it at all. Well, I'll tell you, when I was at school, you would be my best friends. All those who didn't like milk, I would make friends with you during the day. So when it comes to milk time, I would sign up and I would drink your milk as well, because I actually loved it. But the difference was in them days, it is what I call real milk, because over there the cream would be down to there. Yeah, with all the stuff they take out of the milk now, because it's not good for you, but when they were giving it to us as children, the cream was down there. And there's a silver top on there, and the crate, the bottles that are on the top of the crate, the blue tits would all come and get the cream out of the top. The same as they did with the milk when it was delivered on your doorstep. So that's a great big difference about they are actually giving us great big fatty milk when we were children, and now they're telling us it's not good for you. Well, all I would say is it done me all right. I still drink lots of milk and I love it. On the rationing side, they went on about rations, but there was quite a healthy trading in rations, and I have not got a sweet tooth. Sweets have never appealed to me, probably because I didn't have any when I was a child. Because my parents would swap the sweet ration for cheese ration or extra eggs or extra meat, and there was a healthy business in Worthing of people swapping their ration coupons for different things. So, you know, I'm sure all you have unlimited sweets, but I didn't, and it didn't do me any harm either. And now I'd sooner have a pickled onion than I would a chocolate. So, you know, clothing was very, very scarce. And I had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. Fortunately, I was the eldest boy, so they used to have to wear my hand-me-downs. You know, and I was a boy climbing trees and doing all the things boys do. So Tom, I'd finished with them. They weren't really much good, but my brothers still had to wear them. There was a second-hand shop in North Street, because you just couldn't get new clothes. There wasn't any to buy. So when you were on school holidays, your last week of your school holiday, you'd be taken round to the Orellans, and they'd go through all the second-hand clothing in the shop until they found something that reasonably fitted you. And then I always remember my mum and dad saying, no, that fits him now, but it won't fit him in 3 months' time, so can we have a bigger one? So you always went out of the shops wearing stuff ridiculously too big for you, because you would grow into it. And Robin reminded me of a little thing earlier on today. I always wore boots at school, and my father was an ex-soldier, so with boots went hobnails. So as far as he's concerned, it wasn't a pair of boots unless it had hobnails in the soles, because it made the boots last a lot longer. And I found out that when I joined the army as well. But of course, they had highly polished floors, although it was not like that place now, it's nice laminate. They had highly polished schools, so I was actually banned from the school hall because my hobnails would scratch the floor, and Robin only reminded me about that today. Cars is very interesting. I'm saying Sussex Road School, I don't think there was a pupil in the school who turned up in a car. In fact, I can't remember even a teacher having a car while I was at that school. I lived in Station Road, the same as Robin, and we played out in the street all the time. It was our play area, unless we went to the park or up the downs or to the sea. And if a car come along, which was a very, very rare occasion, everybody used to come out the house and have a look at it, because it was such a rare occurrence. So we always walked to school, and we always walked home. And I remember my mum took me to school on day one, and after that I was on my own. And you know, it was a different world then, where we had no problems at all. And if we got home half hour late, our parents didn't really worry, because they know we'd been detoured off, we'd gone into Homefield Park, playing in there, doing whatever. Another little bit interesting about Homefield Park, it's always been the People's Park, and you know, it's home field and all the rest of it, but during the war, they actually dug it up and used it as allotments. So people could actually not only grow vegetables in their garden, as everybody did, and most people had a chicken or several rabbits. I remember in Station of Rabbits, the in thing, when everybody had rabbit hutches, and they would breed rabbits, say not for pets, but for food, because meat was very, very scarce. But so we'd have them allotments, so not only would they have the food what they could produce from their garden, but they'd also have it what they could produce from the allotment as well. And that was that went on, I think, 1947, when they made it back into a park. So I think that's really all I've got to say now. I think I've tied up the ends of any bits that have been missed. Robin, by the way, you won't know, because they came from the posh end of Station Road. I come from the other end, down by the Castle Public House, which really was a pretty rough place to be. But we all grew up. I loved school. I have to say, my attendance, I think, was probably something like 100%, because in them days, they didn't. If you got measles or something like that, they didn't stop going to school. You went to school, so all the other kids could get it, and everybody would get immune. That was one of the things we did. I remember my mum taking me around to somebody's house who had this particularly nasty disease and let me play with him so that I could catch it. So that's what they done. And that's what built up your immune systems. I think we're ready for questions, aren't we?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Yes.
Okay, would you like to say yours first?
Where is Station Road?
Okay, could you explain where Station Road is, please?
Well, if you carry on down Chesswood Road until you get to Park Lane, and then turn right, Station Road is a road that goes around there. It's a very, very old road in Worthing. Part of the village, of course, what Chris knows all about. It used to go all the way down to the bridge. And of course, that's a new bridge there now. When we were kids, it was a very narrow bridge there. And they used to have a big factory on the end of it, a food factory. But it goes round in a loop. It's a big, long way. You must walk past it. It's a sort of road you don't go down unless you live there. Because although most of you go to Morrison's, you know where Morrison's is?
Yeah.
Well, that's they knocked the houses down I lived in to build the car park where Morrison's is now.
Missy?
How long have you been doing this?
The project, well, we were doing it for just over 2 years. So we had lots of people that we interviewed who were telling us about their memories, and there were other people who were going to the library and the museum and over to Chichester to look at old historical documents. So, yeah, quite a long time.
Right. How long was school then?
How long was the school day then? 9 until 4, but we had long time for lunch. Because when we started school, there were no school lunches. You couldn't have a school dinner. You went home to your mum for lunch. And so you had to have a longer time because you were walking home and were walking back to the school. So we had a much longer lunch break than I suspect you did. But our holidays, as Robin said, were about the same as you had, the whole school holidays. Except in the war, they stopped holidays because they wanted children to continue to be safe in schools because they might be in danger of playing in the streets. So during the Second World War, schools went right the way through all the holidays.
Did you remember
We've got a photograph of us on the go. You show yours is bigger than mine. We're in the same class.
School photograph and our class, which is difficult to see there, whether you can hand it round to the children or would they like to have a look. And there's Tommy and I on that photograph. So,
Have a look.
but you can
Have
guess,
a look and pass.
have a guess where we are.
Nathan, how do you get them coupons?
The government used to issue coupons in ration books, and I have still got my last ration book. It's obviously somewhere in my house in a safe place because I couldn't find it, but I have still got my last ration book. And the inside, it had your name and your national insurance number and your address on the home address on the outside, and inside they tore off the coupons when you used them to buy something.
And the rationing for sweets, I think I'm right in saying, lasted for 13 years. 13 years.
The rationing on food did not stop until 1953, 8 years after the war, and it was finally lifted so that people could have street parties to celebrate Her Majesty the Queen's coronation. Like some of you went to street parties for her Diamond Jubilee last year, they had street parties for her coronation in 1953, 2nd of June, and that's when they stopped rationing.
I mean, can you all imagine that? If you go home today, maybe go to the shops or buy some sweets or some drinks with rationing, once you'd had your ration, you couldn't have anything else the rest of the week. Didn't matter how much money you had, you couldn't have any more.
Jessie. You like life better when it was like now? Or
Sorry?
do you like life better like it is now, or do you like it?
Well, one thing I can say about life is this. Whatever age you are, you like. I loved being a school child. I loved being at school right the way through, and I made friends that I still have friends today. I'm sure many of you who've got friends here will stay friends for the rest of your lives. But as you get older, there are compensations for age. And you still enjoy life.
Jane, did you ever have any after-school clubs?
Oh no, not after school clubs, not at junior school. When you got to senior school you did, you could play sports after school. But at the level of school that this is, no, we didn't have anything like that at all.
Were there jobs back then, for like your mum and dad?
Oh yes, well certainly for Dad. It was quite unusual even then, although a lot of ladies had gone out to work during the war. Once the war was over, the men sort of claimed them jobs back, but normally you always had at least one parent at home. And this is what I'm saying, you mentioned when the King died, they brought us all in the hall, announced that the King had died, and then sent us all home. I'm saying, I don't think you could do that nowadays, just send everybody home and say, you know, make your own way home. But in them days it was perfectly acceptable because nearly everybody would have at least one parent at home.
In the evening, would many people be out on the streets?
Yes, I think we used to play in the road. We used to play all sorts of games in the road. I mean, obviously when it got dark, we went indoors, but we played quite a few games outside.
We did. We
We
used to go in seasons. Some say, and nobody. You had conquer season, obviously. Was a big thing. We'd play conkers in the school playground. Like fag cards, we used to have flick your cigarette cards, flick them against the wall, get one to land on another. Marbles, we'd play marbles among the gutters. And all those things seemed to have a season, but nobody knew when they started and stopped. All of a sudden, some child would bring a bag of marbles, and that was it, the marble season started.
And roller skates.
Roller skates was another thing.
Did you ever get bullied?
Well, no, I certainly didn't, no.
I did, yes.
I probably bullied him.
Yes, he did. He bullied me. No, seriously, yes, I was bullied at school. It was one of the things you just put up with. It wasn't a big deal. You did something wrong, you get put out with. That was it.
How big were your houses?
I lived at number 5 Station Road. It had, say, no bathroom. It had a box room, two bedrooms upstairs, a box room, and 2 rooms downstairs, and a scullery, which housed a copper boiler.
You better say what scullery was.
Oh, yes, beg your pardon. It's an old kitchen, which held a copper boiler, which my mother used to heat up and do her washing. And a small backyard, and the front door opened up onto the stairs. So the door opened and there were the stairs up to the bedrooms and the 2 rooms at each side, which was called the front room and the dining room.
I lived in a 3-bedroom house that had a bathroom, and it was a Victorian house. It's a Victorian house, and when they were saying what a scullery was, in old houses, in the kitchen, they had no water. They kept the wet items out in the scullery. So the sink for washing up and cooking was in the scullery, and
I think
you cooked things in the kitchen.
I think it's called a utility room.
Yeah.
I think
But that's the same old principle.
I think the biggest difference between yours and ours now, we didn't have a bathroom. So what we had was a tin bath we used to hang on the garden wall, and every Sunday night it would be pulled into the house, put in front of the fire, and I was lucky because I was the second oldest, so I was the second into the bath. But my youngest brother, he was number 6, and he had to bath in the same water all of us had already bathed. Sounds horrible, and it only happened once a week. We only had 1 bath a week. I'm saying as a boy that was too many for me anyway. But we take it for granted now. We shower or we bath every day of the week. Certainly at the end of the war, no way did you do that, because it was a major exercise. Every kettle had to be boiled up on the stove, and to get a bath full of lukewarm water was a major effort. So you had your bath once a week, and the rest of the time you had a soap and flannel, and that was it.
Leah?
Do you play any of your favourite games?
Pardon, sorry?
Do you play any of your favourite games?
Do we still play any of our favourite games? Oh yes, I quite still like the game of Monopoly. Now Monopoly, have you all played Monopoly? Yeah. No, Monopoly. Well, Monopoly has been about since before the Second World War. And so we grew up playing Monopoly, and we always played cards in our family, and board games. Sorry was one that I remember playing. You had 4 people and you had your own men, and you had to try and get to your home, but you could knock other people back to start. And in our family, we used to all send Dad back to start, so that if Dad started off as badly as he had when he began.
I still play marbles with my granddaughter, and that's quite fun.
Do you have pets?
Yes, we had a dog. We had a black Labrador.
I had a tortoise and a cat.
We certainly had a dog.
Leah?
Someone is what I think has been changed to the name Ludo.
Yes, Ludo.
Ludo
We played
was
Ludo.
And there was also a game, that used to have sticks and used to put
Oh yes, sticks. Yes, I think I've got a book
you
somewhere
put them
in
into
this
the holes and then you jump over it. And
Yes, Chinese checkers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Chinese checkers, yes.
Or something it's called later.
Yes, but it's called all sorts of things.
That's my favourite game.
It's a very ancient Chinese game.
Hayley?
Did you ever get a chance to learn to play an instrument?
Oh, no.
If your parents paid for you to, my father was a great musician, and he tried to get me to play the piano, and I'm sure he spent hard-earned money on my lessons, and they were a complete waste of money.
The nearest we ever got, and we had to make it, so it was a sort of a do-it-yourself, was a flute, which we made a bit of bamboo and a cork and some holes in it. I wasn't very good at that, so I ended up in the triangle. I remember it very well. But that was the nearest we got to musical instruments.
William?
Water,
No. And funnily enough, water was one commodity which used to be supplied by the town council. The town council provided water. Now it's you know, as a commercial enterprise, Southern Water. But no, there was no rationing on water. I'm saying obviously during the droughts it would get cut off and that, but there was a big, because it was wartime, there was a lot of reservoirs built all over town for emergency water supply. And certainly Holmesville Park had one of them. A big concrete thing that just would hold water for an emergency. So water is not a problem as I ever remember it.
There was only one tap in the house.
There was only ever one tap in the house.
One tap.
You know, other than that, I can't remember ever being short of water. But as a boy, water wouldn't have interested me anyway.
Harry.
Should parents ever worry when you're outside?
No.
Oh, no.
Just out.
And in actual fact, there's still something that you children can see. If you go on the beach, near Beach House Park, near the new swimming baths, up high up, there's a clock that's like a three-sided clock. Any of you seen it when you've been on the beach around that part of Worthing? Well, there's a sign there that tells you that that clock was bought by the school children of Worthing. I have to say I forget which year.
Nobody had to
This is
pay
something
sixpence.
but all the school children were asked to give sixpence of their pocket money to pay for this clock, so that when we were on the beach, we knew what time it was, so to go home in time for tea.
We lived outside our houses, we really did. Because houses were fairly drab. Well, I'm saying they didn't have emotion, and they were called distemper. Can you remember distemper by the cubes in Woolworths and you had water and it sort of used to cover the dirt up. And all the woodwork was always a very horrible brown. I don't know, and you know, they would be summoned if they sold it now, because it's full of lead. I'm saying how we survived, we don't know, but we did. Home, actually, other than maybe the warmth and the food, all the exciting things happen outside. And I remember hours and hours in Holmesville Park on a normal evening. At a weekend, I'd be up on the downs or down on the beach. And if it was raining, we all used to head for the museum. That was where we went, in the museum or the library. That's where we went when it was raining. We lived out. We really did.
Ryan.
When you played chess, did it hurt when it went down into your hand?
Need a demonstration of it. Come on.
The answer is no. Basically, I don't know whether
Robbie.
give us, come on, go on. I'll try. I'll do it over your box. Got two,
Got two.
and it doesn't hurt at all.
And then you have to try getting them like that. Still, those balanced on the back of your hand.
Yeah.
That was called the crowd.
As I say,
And those ones
they were
were
playing
big,
that
you have
game
to
in
use
loads
it.
of times.
To do this. There we go, that is difficult. Keeping the hands.
He hasn't improved since he
Oh, it's always a bit.
Soldiers President has
Crash.
Junior.
Did you get a chance to learn any languages at school?
No.
Not at junior school, no.
No,
Didn't learn French until you went to senior school.
Yeah, and even then, you know, it wasn't really compulsory. I had one term in French, I remember when I went to St Andrews, didn't like it, so I didn't do it again. So I'm not advocating that any of you should do that. The world has changed considerably. Never appealed to me.
Matthew.
Did you have to wear certain students' uniforms?
No,
Just as long as you're smart. And a grey shirt, boys had grey shirts.
Green ties.
And a green striped ties. How's that working there? As long as you're smart. Short trousers. No long trousers until about 12.
The other thing they used to take a lot of care of was most of us come from poor families. We would certainly be classed as poor now. But the head teacher would never forgive you for having dirty shoes on. Because they said, no matter how poor you are, you can clean your shoes. And that sort of thing. Then we're in having a clean shirt collar. Because being poor doesn't mean to say you have to go around dirty. Because we've already talked about water. Water was one of the things that was never rationed. But we never had uniform. You know, and I never wore school uniform, even in the senior school. It was always an optional extra. Very few children used them.
Where do teachers think you became?
Oh.
No.
You want a demonstration?
No, I never remember hearing anybody at Sussex Road School was hit with
Yeah,
cane.
so this is mainly a pointer, and to get your attention, that was all. Point to the board, and if you were making a noise, a hard tap on a desk, it would get your attention. So that wasn't usually the case.
Jordan.
Do you know the house called the Hollies?
Yes,
How old has it been there?
this was the
That house is over 200 years old, and it's built of yellow brick. If you look at it, and those bricks were made from clay from Worthing Seashore. They're very special bricks, and you can always tell buildings of Worthing yellow brick because it's that light creamy colour. So it's an old building and a quite special one. You're going to live there? Oh, really? How exciting!
I was an electrician and I didn't like that. There we go.
Because it has been offices. You're going to move in as a house, are you? Oh, well, there's a lot of history there. A lot of history. We can, if you or your parents want to contact me, there's a lot of information about all the people who lived there years and years ago.
Important announcement.
They're very important.
Were shoes made of leather then?
Well, they were, but they did bring in a synthetic leather as well, which probably today you would call cardboard. But you know, it was all make and mend, and leather was quite a hard commodity to get because there was a big demand for it for the military, for the war effort. So it was quite a long time after the war ended that real leather shoes were readily available.
Stephen.
Would you go to school every day of the week?
No, only Monday to Friday. Monday to Friday.
No.
Oh, what about Sunday school?
Oh, Sunday school, yeah. I'll tell you, I think we all went to Sunday school.
Because do any of you go to Sunday school? No, so they need to tell them what that was then.
Well, Sunday school, well, you learned about religion, obviously, but it also followed on. I'm saying, you know the St Paul's Centre in Chapel Road, do you know it? That big white one that looks like a church, well, it used to be a church, and certainly when I was your age, I was a choir boy in that. And that's what I spent my Sundays on, really, was Sunday morning service, Sunday evening service, and Sunday school in the middle.
And the best bit about Sunday school was they had Christmas parties,
Yeah.
and they gave you a present, which was really quite exciting for those days, a surprise present. And in the summer, they took you on an outing somewhere like Chesswood Zoo or the Isle of Wight. And so you'd like to go to Sunday school to get on the extra.
You went just for the holiday, did you, Tom?
I'd say the trick was, and I'm not really proud of it, but it was a fact of life, the trick was to belong to 2 Sunday schools, because then you would be able to go to 2 parties and 2 outings. It took a lot of planning to do that, but it was possible.
And you got paid.
And as a choir boy, of course, you got paid for it. I think probably in a month I'd get something like 2 shillings. Once I got to the head choir boy,
You know
which was a lot, that's 10 pence.
Do you know what choir boys are? Some of them, they were, yes? Yes, do you know?
Choir boy is basically somebody who sings in church.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah. And if you sang, my brother was a choir boy, and if they got asked to go on a Saturday to sing for a wedding service, they got an extra £0.5 crown,
Half a crown,
which is 25p.
12 and a half.
Oh, sorry, 12.5p.
And the same for funeral. It was the same for a wedding and a funeral, half a crown. It's 12.5 pence. But that was a lot of money. Really was a lot of money.
Were there any sports like basketball?
We did have a sports day which was held at Hungerville Park. Consisted of a running race, a sack race. Do you know what a sack race is? Egg and spoon race. Eggs were short, so you either had a stone or a potato. Run along with a spoon so you didn't drop it. If you dropped it, you were out.
Sack race.
Sack race, we did a 3-legged race. That was fun. You know what 3-legged race is?
Yeah.
That was fun. A few broken bones there. What else, Tom? Was there anything else? There was no high jumps or long jumps. It was just basic running.
It was a fun day more
Yeah,
than
it was a
wasn't.
fun day.
You wouldn't even consider it sports. It was a fun day really, you know, and it took very little planning. I can't even remember whether we had white lines in the
Yeah, we did have white lines.
We did have white lines.
That was a luxury.
But in the playground at school, we had climbing frames, which our parents had raised money to buy, so that because it was just plain ground after the war, the playground, and then they put in these climbing frames that our mums and dads bought.
What made you want to study wording?
What made, well, they hadn't really studied Worthing, they are Worthing. So I studied them.
We just find it very interesting, you know, what things were. It's great, it's good fun.
In school, why would your hands have to be clean in your nails?
It's very important them days that, you know, cleanliness was next to godliness, I remember our teacher saying. And dirty nails it was just one of those things, it was considered again, it was something to do. No matter how poor you were, you could clean your fingers and your nails. So that was one of the things the teachers insisted on. You had a clean handkerchief, and your hands were clean at the start of the day. I don't think there's any other reason than that.
I just thought of something interesting, I think it's interesting. I don't know how many people are in each class in your school.
About 30.
Well, we had 42 children in one class with one teacher, and we sat in rows at desks, and the seats were attached to the desk with metal frames, and you only were allowed to speak when you were allowed to speak. You didn't chatter at all.
What types of music do you listen
What types of music? Mainly classical music, I think, on the radio. That's all we ever listen to. There's no pop music as such at all.
Well, you probably lose a lot, you know, but sort of our parents would be listening to Vera Lynn and people like that.
Yes.
And Shelton rings a bell.
Mario Lanza.
Mario Lanza, yeah. I'm saying totally different music to what you have nowadays.
Pop music, as you know, it really didn't happen until the 1960s.
What would happen if you talk to
You would be severely reprimanded and made to feel very silly.
One of the regular punishments was to stand in the corner of the classroom with your back to the class. And if you do that for half an hour, actually it's quite demeaning, because you know all your friends are laughing behind their hands.
Or throwing things at them.
Or throwing things at you.
When the teacher wasn't looking.
Five more questions.
When you're the boss.
Yeah. James.
Did you ever go out for Halloween?
Halloween.
Oh, Halloween wasn't
Halloween wasn't on the radar.
night, wasn't it?
Halloween,
Bonfire night, we certainly went there, bonfire night.
but Halloween was reintroduced into England really by Blue Peter. You know the programme on television?
Yeah.
When they were looking for ways to fill up their programme schedule for the year. Halloween is something that used to happen in England in olden days, and then it went to America when the people emigrated to America when it was a young country, and they maintained Halloween in America, but really until Blue Peter reintroduced it as such, it didn't happen here.
Abby, if you were ill at school, would you have been sent home or would you have had to just cope at school?
You know, you've been sent home.
Depending on the illness
Yes,
was,
yes,
but mainly
But if
you
you-
were just sent home. I don't think it was a nurse or
Oh,
anybody
no.
like that.
No.
I think your mother would be called somehow. I don't know how. Wasn't the telephone?
We must tell them about Nicky Dora. I'm saying there was one day a year when the nurse used to come to school,
Yeah.
and we used to call her Nicky Nora, because she used to go through everybody's hair looking for...
Not mine.
He did have hair, looking for things in your hair that shouldn't be there. And it was a sort of an annual inspection, and it doesn't matter what her name was, she was always known as Nicky Nora.
Did you ever have to pay bills for your house?
Bills.
Well, yes,
Certainly.
we had rent was 12 and 6. What was that? What were we in now?
12 and 6 is 62.5p.
62.5p was rent. for a three-bedroom house. Bills were, yes, no, the water was free.
You know, where there's money rent.
Yeah, the electric was a meter where you put a penny in, or no electric, you had a gas meter. You put a penny in the gas meter, which allowed for a couple of weeks, I suppose, for gas.
How long was your break time?
How long was your break time, playtime at school?
Lunchtime was quite a long time.
Yeah.
But half an hour, because you had to drink your milk.
Yeah, half an hour in the morning.
Mid-morning, I know.
About half an hour just playing in the playground.
Long enough for the teachers to have a cup of tea.
I think that's what it is.
Probably the answer.
What sort of stuff did you get for Christmas?
What kinds of presents did you receive at
Oh.
The government produced a book of telling parents how to make toys for their children. My father made a kaleidoscope for me, and he used the wrappings of the sweets curled up, and he had 3 pieces of glass, and he covered the outside with what was called blackout paper, which was black, which people had put on their windows so that the planes going over didn't see you had lights on. And he made me a kaleidoscope, I remember that. He also made me, with 2 sticks, like a monkey on the end, that you squeezed the sticks and the monkey did turning over. But as I said earlier, there were no new toys. You either had to have old toys in your family or your mum and dad made them for you.
Christmas time was a sack on the end of it, was a pillowcase on the end of the bed, and in it was probably an orange, an apple, a toy car, and a book. And that was my Christmas present.
What kind of building was Chesswood School?
School.
What, before this was built?
Well, this is houses here.
There were greenhouses here where they grew tomatoes and cucumbers. Quite extensive from that house there right to the end of the next house. It's about 6 or 7 greenhouses on this ground.
At Christmas time, did you have any decorations at Christmas?
Oh yeah, we used to make them. And so we used to make what they call the traditional Christmas chains, and the whole family would sit there. You'd have strips of paper, which are on end of the garment, you'd lick them and stick them together. And you'd have to make enough of them to at least do the whole of the front room. Probably you call the lounge now, but in our house we always had a front room and a back room.
And there were masses of decorations.
But they were normally made. I suppose as we got a bit more well off, we used to go to Walls and buy the odd 6-penny paper chain or whatever. But normally they were made at Christmas.
Why did you have handkerchiefs at school?
You shouldn't ask a boy that. You should ask a
To blow
lady.
your nose on.
No, then put it in your pocket.
Didn't have tissues, if that's what you mean.
They won't be
Is that what
there.
you mean?
They won't be there.
There were no tissues. They had handkerchiefs made of fabric, and then your mum washed them.
That's the last one.
What was the?
What made you want to study?
Oh, what made me study? Well, I think when I was very small, my grandfather used to talk a lot about when he was a boy, which I found interesting. He actually lived in Horsham, not Worthing, but it's not very far away. And when I got a bit older, I thought, well, it would be interesting to know what happened here in the past. And the thing about local history is it's easier to find out things, and it's easier to see how, like that girl there who's moving into the Hollies, there's a house that I know quite a lot about. And in a way that's more interesting than history about a country, which is hard to, relate to personally. You can't just go out and see it easily. And you can find, local history can tell you a lot about how things have changed over time. So I think that's why.
And yours is the very last question.
When the new water centre was at school, were the houses still up and sit now?
Sydney Water Centre with the houses that are there now?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yes.
Exactly the same.
French
Hasn't changed at all. All those houses in that area are exactly the same.
They were all built about the same time. So the Sydney Water Centre, that was a school, is it's nearly 110 years old.
1902.
Yeah, over 100. Yeah. So, and the houses were built about the same time.
So nobody alive today will remember anything other than how it is now. So the house is a lot more brighter now. You know, people have decorated and double glazing and all that, which of course they wouldn't have had in them days. But and then, if to say Sussex Road and them roads, they're now are quite nice roads. Well, they used to be fairly drab. They really did.
There weren't the cars then.
No cars at all.
Is the photograph still floating around?
Yeah, it is. It's gradually moving around.
See who's